Greetings and welcome back for another guide to a particular master from Malifaux 3rd edition, this time looking at Asami from 10 Thunders. This is a master that recently underwent a rework, and they removed the old flicker mechanic that was being able to spend flicker on Oni models to gain +2 attack and damage flips. And if you reached 3 flicker and weren't able to remove them by the end of your activation or turn, I can't remember, then you died. But now that mechanic is gone and has been largely replaced by 2 new crew upgrades in combination with the rift markers, which are now present in both versions of Asami. I've been playing an unbelievable amount of Asami in the last couple of months, leading up to a large team tournament event held in Poland last weekend. And now that that's done, I wanted to share my experience with her and provide a guide similar to the ones that I've already done on Lin, Shen, and McCabe. If those are masters that sound interesting to you, then of course you can go and check out those guides. Just search for them in the channel and they'll pop up. This video is going to be focused on Asami2. I think that there is enough content to warrant one video per version of Asami. If that's not the case, then you never know. I might rename this video and at the end we'll move on to Asami1. But usually I end up spending more time than I wished rather than less. So I'm going to discuss Asami2 quite specifically in this video, and then probably in another video I'll be doing Asami1. My gaming PC is currently in the shop for service, and that's where a couple of recordings of other Asami2 games are held. One of them I had already uploaded to YouTube, and I've just made that one public. There'll be 2 more coming just whenever my PC gets fixed, so there'll be some examples of what I'm talking about in this video that you can have a look at and see them in tournament games. Okay, so what does the new Asami 2 do? Well, for that, you suppose you sort of want to think, what did the old Asami 2 do? Well, she was probably one of the worst masters in the entire game, if not the worst. And so what she did in the past is pretty much irrelevant because it no longer exists in the game. And so that's the last I'm really going to say about that. So we're now going to go in and have a look at what Asami 2 actually does. What she does is provides a crew upgrade for all of the Oni in her crew, and this is the largest part of her kit, I would say, which is to say, Oni models in this crew gain the following abilities. Not of this reality. This model is unaffected by rift markers, so handy because there'll be lots of them, and they are hazardous. So if you're wondering what rift markers are, they are a 30mm destructible hazardous damage 1 marker. That's it. They are not severe, they are not concealing, they are just hazardous damage 1 and destructible. However, if your crew is led by Asami2, your Oni models, worth mentioning that your out of keyword ones will not be able to do this, will be unaffected by those rifts. And then where we get to the good stuff is dimensional rifts. Once per activation after this model resolves an action where it ended a move within 1 inch of a friendly rift marker, it may place anywhere within 6 inches and also within 1 inch of a friendly rift marker. This is a little bit complicated and has a great number of uses. So I think it's probably going to be best if I show you rather than simply talk about it. So, if we have a rift marker here, and we have, let's take a Jorogumo because they're big. All right, so we have a rift marker. We've got a 1 inch aura around that, and we're going to put some others in the general area. Okay. And then we have a Jorogumo. The Jorogumo was changed as part of the rework and now has movement 6. So we have this Jorogumo. So long as it's the Jorogumo's activation, and that's important, so if another model pushes the Jorogumo, it's not able to teleport using the Entangled Spirits crew upgrade. It must be during the Jorogumo's own activation. If it takes a movement which ends within one of a rift. So for example, if we decide we're going to move this way and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we are now within one of this rift marker. Therefore, we are able to take the entangling rifts effect, and so we are able to place anywhere within 6. However, so a bit like leap, basically. However, that leap must also finish. It must start and finish within one of a rift marker. So we could go to here, and we could go here. This is legal. This is legal, but this is not. It's within 6 of our current position, but it's not within one of a rift marker, and therefore not a legal position to use entangling spirits. You can additionally use the same rift marker that you used to teleport from. So let's imagine that we were starting over here, we reached here, we would be allowed to place here onto the other side of the same rift marker if we wished. So you can have an unbelievable amount of movement potential available to you, and there are several things that are worth knowing rules-wise about this. So first is you can charge doing this. So to give you an idea of how silly that can be, let's math out the maximum. So that is the max there. And then once we are there, we can place within 6, which is there, and that needs to be within 1. And then and that could even be, right, that could be there, right? Yeah, so that could be there. And then that's got a 2-inch reach, so that would be our target. Yeah, there's the target, right? And then we take a tape and we measure from that point to that point. And we see that the charge threat on a Jorogumo goes from 8 inches to approximately 16 inches. The reason that this works, by the way, if you're wondering, is that you when you take a charge, you generate a push, and since you took a movement during your activation, you are then able to place with entangling spirits, and then the action continues. So you'd be able to take the push, teleport, and then generate the melee action as normal. So you are able to charge using this. Of course, usual rules apply that you do need to not be engaged in order to charge, unless you have a particular rule that says you can ignore that. So that's the first thing, that it works with charges. The next thing is that it works rather well in terms of meaning that you don't really ever need to disengage. So if we imagine that this Thangyong is from an enemy player and it's engaging our Jorogumo here, and we want to effectively disengage. Instead, what we could do is we could say, okay, I'm going to walk to here. That walk action is legal because it has started and ended within the engagement range of the model engaging us. However, it's also allowed us to use entangling spirits because we've taken a movement during our activation which has ended within 1 inch of a rift marker. Therefore, we are able to place within 6 and within 1 inch of another rift marker, and now we've successfully disengaged without flipping a card, and now we're all the way over here, and then we can drop a scheme marker or charge something up here or do whatever else we were looking to do. So being able to use rift markers to effectively disengage from wherever you are, so long as you've got rift markers around, which you probably will, and I'll explain why in a little bit, is very effective. So yep, that's another use, is disengaging. Another use of rift markers is climbing. It's dealing with height, climbing and or falling. So if we imagine that we've got Asami2 here, we'll come on to her abilities in a little bit, but to cut to it, she can within 8 drop a shockwave, which is in fact a rift marker. So she takes that action. Now, what you need to do in order to be able to climb things a bit more efficiently is you need to put that marker up on top of the thing that you wish to sort of help with the height of, whether that's climbing or falling, and you want to make sure that the edge of the rift marker is at the very least touching, if not slightly overlapping the terrain. I'm not 100% now whether you're allowed markers to overlap the edge, but In practice, I think you can, and if not, then what you want is you want it touching the very edge of the terrain. Why is that important? It's important because of shadow rules and because of line of sight. So, and because of distance and height and these things. So, now, we have a rift marker now that's up on top of this terrain. So now, if the Jorogumo wants to climb up this thing, he'd normally have to pay 2 of his movement to walk up there, but instead, he can walk to here. He's now within 1 of a rift marker. He can now place anywhere within 6. That can be up here as well, and that's now within 1 of a rift marker, so it's a legal position for him to be. Placing himself doesn't require loss, so he doesn't need loss of the position where he wishes to be. He simply needs loss of the initial rift marker and the finishing rift marker, and since he had both, this is a legal way to go, and just saved yourself an extra 2 inches of movement. So that's climbing up. Additionally, climbing down. Normally you would have to pay 2 or take damage in order to move down, but now we can simply move up to a legally supported position and then place ourselves within 6. Now, does that suffer from the -2 from going down? It does on ranged, so presumably it would here, so I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure about that one. Shadow rules, as you can tell, are pretty horribly written and are a bit of a nightmare, so double check on whether when you're coming down, whether you lose the 2 inches from the height. I'm not going to say one way or the other in this guide because I don't want to put out bad information, so that one needs double checking. Okay, so that's some height stuff, some disengage stuff, some charge stuff. The other thing that's worth mentioning then is that both of these models, these are good examples, now have somewhere on their card, they have repositions. So the Jorogumo has it on one of its bonus actions, and Asami also. So in this case, reposition on a bonus for Asami would be enough to give her that 3-inch movement. So she takes a bonus, does the effect of the bonus, we'll come on to it, and then she takes that reposition. That reposition is still a movement during her activation, thus it triggers entangled spirits, and she could then move up to there. So in other words, she gets basically a free leap just for getting the reposition trigger, and then can continue to take all of her normal AP from a better position. So that is how entangled spirits works, and that's what we're going to be looking at quite a bit here. So I'll get rid of these and make a few more copies up here. Cool. So that's the first part. The second part is, so what does the new crew do then? So if the old one was using flicker and using pos for ridiculous value there, what's the new crew doing and why is it so strong? And spoiler, it is. Well, the hazardous markers have quite a bit of synergy with other things that you can do in the crew. Not only this sort of effectively having free leap on every model in the crew, you also have got 2 Asami2s. You also have now access to Hazardous, which Thunder's had before in the form of Mei Feng, but Mei Feng is pretty weak, and her ways of generating more hazardous damage and then getting you into it were pretty inefficient, whereas in this crew, in addition to having ridiculous mobility, you've also got survivability and damage, so you've pretty much got the whole package. So let's talk about the ways in which you can generate more and more hazardous. So rift markers, they are one form of hazardous. The other one is Zako. So Zako, and I think maybe now it's the time to bring out the cards. So let's start doing that. I will come on to these crews in general in a little bit, but for now we'll just be looking at certain cards and certain abilities. So Zako now has Miasma of Boils and Flies without a TN, so there is no flip. It is no longer severe, so it's only hazardous, and it's also only 3 inches aura. So if you remember the old version, it was both severe and 4. Now it is simply hazardous and 3. But there is no flip, there is no suit, there is no requirement whatsoever. You simply need an AP, and you can pop up this 3-inch hazardous aura. And then, so long as that there is a rift marker anywhere within that area, you've suddenly got this sweet spot here where anything touching that will be taking 1 point, plus 1 point, plus whatever damage you did that put them there in the first place. So you are starting to turn a lot of your attacks into quite seriously damaging pieces, and after you're done with that, they are still standing in double hazardous, so if they then chose to either activate and take an action, or be moved and thus try to be saved by one of their other models, they would still move within 2 forms of hazardous and would take 2 more damage as well. So it's very, very crippling, very, very difficult to deal with. So that's Amanjaku. The third form of hazardous is the table. So if the table itself happens to have some lava on it, for example, then now we have a wonderful sweet spot over here with both Hazardous 1 from Ama, Hazardous 1 from the Rift, and Hazardous 1 and Burning 1 from the lava. So effectively you're taking 4 points of damage just for touching this area of the table. There are a few ways to make people touch that area of the table, and we'll come on to them, but at the moment we're just talking about ways to make these sweet spots where a serious amount of pain can befall your opponent. Then another way to add on a little bit more is a bit more niche and doesn't happen all that often, but it can happen, and that is Story of Raijin. So if you take Story of Raijin, and I will explain why I think often that's a very good call, you have access to Thunderstruck, that's his Shockwave, normally just a standard Shockwave 2, Movement 13, Damage 2 and Stun, so already quite a good Shockwave. However, there's a Crow trigger, Electric Fields. Until the end phase, enemy models treat the area within 1 inch of friendly scheme markers touched by a pulse generated by this Shockwave as hazardous. So in other words, if we come back over here and we take a scheme marker, suddenly if we have a Raijin over here, he takes his Shockwave. I will grab a Shockwave. He drops that Shockwave here with the Crow trigger. Then suddenly anything that was in this area has to test, and additionally now this scheme marker is also 1 inch hazardous area. So it's worth noting, just a reminder, that the rift markers themselves are only hazardous on the markers themselves, so it's not a 1 inch radius from them. But you've got 3 inches around Ama, 1 inch around a scheme marker from Raijin, and then you've got the hazardous markers themselves. So suddenly this area here is just instant death for basically anyone that touches it. In addition to that, there's one more form of hazardous, and that comes from Story of Suzaku. So any scheme marker that he can see within 6 inch aura of himself, so for example this one, now becomes hazardous burning 1 for your opponents only. So again, this hazardous is for your opponents only, this hazardous from Raijin is opponents only, this one from Suzaku is opponents only, and this rift marker is opponents only, so long as you are an Oni model. So the only hazardous that you need to worry about is your out of keyword models, so Raijin doesn't really want to stand here necessarily, and also the hazardous from the table itself, so stuff like the lava. Obviously most of our models do not ignore that, but we can create these areas of unbelievable hazardous pain for anyone coming anywhere near them. So that is how creating hazardous works. And now let's talk about the ways to manipulate that. So once you've got those areas of absolute death, how do we move people around in them? Well, this is a video talking about Asami2, but it's worth noting that Asami1 herself has pulled here or there, I think it is, on a mask trigger, so she can, on her melee action, not only deal 2, 4, 6, but also push you around within the hazardous, and she has a bonus that can create one of those rift markers and push it under you, dealing an unresisted damage before she even gets started. So Asami1, one of the ways that the Oni crew can push things around. The main way, and one of the very often MVPs of the crew, is Story of Suzaku. In Story, it's a pretty terrible model and offers very little, but in Oni, it starts to really shine. Reason being, the crew upgrades give it unbelievable mobility and a ridiculous synergy with one of its bonus actions. We'll talk about that once we get to the model itself. But also because it has Up We Go, which is a 3 versus size attack with a 3 inch place as its base attack. That's 2, 3, 4. When you take 2, 3, 4, plus 1 from the Rift, plus 1 from Amma, plus 1 from the table, plus 1 from Raijin, plus burning from a scheme, you can see that all of that starts to get very silly all at once. Now, you will almost never, ever, ever get all of those things at once, because any opponent that would stay anywhere near that area of the table in the time that it took you to set that up would have to be absolutely suicidal. But the combination of a Rift Marker and No Zako alone, which is very easy to set up and will almost always be there so long as Ama is alive, is already enough to make Suzaku a min 4 beater who can be given fast very easily by Asami2, and who can leap with a bonus very easily by being pushed 1 and then using the Entangled Spirit's Rift teleportation. So Suzaku becomes a ridiculously strong displacement tool, and any displacement tool within an Oni crew is an absolute murderer. So that's Suzaku. Then we have Raijin. So again, I come back to Raijin. This is an out of keyword pick that I do quite enjoy and I think is solid. There are two parts of Raijin's card that make him particularly good at this. The first one here is Fujin's Wind on the front of his card. When an enemy model within 3 inches activates, it must pass a TN13 movement duel, or this model may push it up to 3 inches. So once you've set up your area of death, hopefully within the bubble of the opponent as much as possible, you then run Raijin into the middle of it, and then anytime anyone activates, they have to pass a 13 movement duel, otherwise you can push them. First of all, you can push them into an area that they don't enjoy. Second of all, there will probably be at least 2 forms of Hazardous sitting around there, and so you can push them into those. That means that then they've already activated, they've been pushed, and they take 2 damage. Then they take their first action, they take 2 more damage, and if that action doesn't manage to move them out of the Hazardous, if you manage to, I don't know, thwart their attempts to disengage, then suddenly they take another 2 for doing anything else and are very, very likely dead at that point. So Fujin's Wind costs you absolutely nothing. You just need Raijin in the area, and all of a sudden, all of their models are really, really struggling, especially if they are low movement models. On top of that, we have his melee attack, Tempest, which first thing it does is place the target within 1 inch of this model and then deals 2, 3, 4. So again, if you have 2 forms of Hazardous, a Rift Marker and No Zako kicking around, then suddenly you become a 4, 5, 6 model, attacking 6 against movement. So you have a stat advantage. You've also got Well Versed to potentially increase the chances of hitting or reduce the chances of a black Joker. And you have, as I say, a damage track of effectively 4, 5, 6. So, quite a tasty little model. Then on top of that, you have Maddening Drums, so a 10-inch willpower attack that can move somebody to a marker within 6 of them, and would then push them, so it would push them through all the Hazardous that you've created, and then let's imagine that there's a corpse marker and a rift marker there. You push them up to those 2 markers, have them remove them to deal 4 damage, 2 per marker removed, and suddenly you've got 4 damage plus maybe, let's say, on average 2 types of Hazardous, and they take 6 damage from an attack where you don't even need to beat their total, you just need to match it, and Maddening Drums will go off. So, assuming that they are not immune to displacement, Maddening Drums can be a very, very significant and reliable source of massive damage. Slight downside, does remove the markers that it touches in order to deal damage, and sometimes you can be removing your own rifts that you might want to stick around, or, for example, it might, you might find yourself removing that scheme marker that you just made Hazardous, and that might be worth it at the time, but it's a bit of a shame if you happen to remove your own markers. So this works ever so slightly better if there is another source of marker generation from the opponent, preferably, so that you're removing something useful to them. So Raijin, another really good form of displacement. If we're not using Raijin, next up is probably Kenshiro. Kenshiro is a model that I sometimes put into the Raijin slot, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is he's incorporeal, so despite the fact that he's out of keyword, he also ignores the rift markers and he ignores all that Hazardous that you're looking to play with. So incorporeal, very nice bit of synergy there. And his attack is another attack which is generally with a stat advantage, so 7 against defense, 1, 2, 3 damage. Not amazing, but not bad. And then move the target up to 3 inches. So that's inbuilt. You don't need a trigger for it, and you simply get it. So you hit them, they move, they take the 1, 2, 3, and then they take the Hazardous as well. And again, with the stat advantage, you're very likely to land that. The 2 triggers are incredibly good, so coordinated attack, allowing usually Amanjaku or a Jorogumo to take another attack, or maybe even something like Raijin might be able to take an attack and push the model around a bit more, or maybe Suzaku, and up we go, and away they go into some horrible, horrible spot where they're dead or can't be saved. Weeping Blade, another excellent one, so you suddenly become 3, 4, 5, and then on top of that, you've got the let's say, 2 forms of Hazardous, so you suddenly 5, 6, 7 if you've got the ram trigger available on stat 7. You can see already that this is pretty brutal. On top of that, Kenshiro does bring some much loved card fixing, so he allows you to cheat with the top card of your fate deck. You gain cheat tokens that you can spend to do that. They're actually called tactics tokens, and you gain 2 per turn, and then you can spend them with any model that you wish to cheat from the top. You do have to keep that result, so if you choose to do it and it doesn't work, then that's sad, you don't get to have another go, but it can be really, really good for actions that you'd like to go off, and they should go off, but they didn't, and you'd just like to have another go at it, and if it fails, well, so be it. You know, it's not the game-ending move. So in this crew, and we will talk about it in more detail, there are quite a number of TN5s and TN6s that you would like to go off. They're not crippling if they don't, but it would be nice, and Kenshiro giving you these tactics tokens to make those fly is really handy. On top of that, he has Seeking the Blade, which allows you to have a look at the top 2 cards after a successful melee attack. So A, you know what's coming, and B, if there's any jokers showing, you're able to reveal it and draw it. So that's very, very handy. Filtering out the blacks, finding the reds, and so on. So Kenshiro, another reasonably decent form of displacement that you can use in combination with the Hazardous available to you. So then we have Batari. Ohagoro Batari is still a tech piece, so she was a tech piece before, but a particularly weak one because she didn't have a bonus action and because her card wasn't quite good enough to make up for that. That is still essentially the case. She's still not quite good enough, but she's closer. So she has gained a bonus action. It's I've Got Your Back, which is, considering it has no triggers available and has, you know, a cost that is quite specific, and an effect that is questionably good a lot of the time, sometimes excellent, sometimes brilliant, but most of the time this is effectively the same as not having a bonus, so a lot of the time she simply doesn't have one. But now she has this hunting song, so essentially a lure, which also drops a rift marker into base contact with the target, with a mask trigger that allows you to sometimes push them away instead of bringing them forwards. It also has a focused cleansing trigger that allows her to self-heal and end conditions, so that's all kind of nice. Essentially the lure is the thing that is probably the most impactful and useful. But the bit that makes her a tech piece is Unnerving Presence. Enemy models within 6 inches aura may not declare resistance triggers. So things like Asami2 that we're seeing a reasonable amount of recently, and also Zip 1, the ability to essentially just shut down those resistance triggers, or if you see maybe Colette Dubois and you're concerned about Colette 1, then Batari can really, really threaten to shut that down, and isn't a complete waste of time if they don't happen to declare that title of the master. Yeah, she is mainly there because, I mean, there are various things that are quite nice on her card, so Diving Charge, Terrifying 11, these aren't bad things to have. Defense, Willpower, and Movement of 6, that's a really solid stat line, no one can complain about that. She's a henchman, again, handy, but her attack is a 2-3-5, so you've not got the mod spikes, you've not got them in 3. What you do have is if the target's within 1 of a rift marker, this action gains a pos flip to its dual. So this is a model that won't necessarily cost you too much in terms of resources. You shouldn't need or want to pour all of your resources into making Batari's activation work unless you need to get that one hunting song off to really bring the model in that you want to kill. That's probably worth investing a card. But generally speaking, you can just swing with the Blackened Teeth attack and hope to hit one of your triggers. And the reason that I mentioned Batari in this section of the video is because she does have Shove Aside on the mask trigger. So once per activation, push the target 4 inches away from this model. So in other words, you get your 2-3-5, and on top of that, you get the push, triggering any and all Hazardous that they are in or pass through. After that, we have Yume, which is another niche to not great model that I don't think many people will take. I certainly don't anymore. So she used to be the linchpin of Asami1 lists because of Warp the Veil, which was in the past not once per turn. It was just any time a model was placed, you could have a look at 2 cards and discard any weaks. Now it's once per turn, and if a model's placed within 6, this model can have a look at the top 3 cards. So you look at 1 more card, but you can only do it once per turn. In the past, you would be looking to get that to go off maybe 5, 6, 7 times per turn if you could. So you were looking at in the region of 10 to 14 cards and filtering out the weaks. Now you're looking at 3. So you can see that that has dropped dramatically. Yes, she still has Terrifying 12 and Unimpeded. Yes, when she activates, she can remove a rift to draw a card. But she's not really worth her cost anymore, because her main function was to give you the scrying mechanic to look at cards and use those to find the cards you needed to summon with Asami1, or to deal serious damage with her severe 236 stat line. The reason I mention her in this part of the video is because she does still have the Hole in the World trigger on a tome on her melee. Now, she is an enforcer, so you'd have to have that card in hand, and of course the opponent would be very wise to try to stop you, so it's going to need to be a pretty high tome, but it's there. Additionally, you've got Coil Around Prey, her bonus, which allows you to place the target into base contact with this model, but you need to be within 3 inches of it to do so, and Yume is a 6/5 enforcer with 8 health, and her only real defensive tech is Terrifying, and to a lesser extent Feed on Fear. So unless you've got Asami2 sitting there trying to save her ass, then I think she's just going to die. I don't think she does enough card draw to be worth it, and I personally have never yet run her in a game with either version of Asami since the rework. Then we have one more, which is a bit of a weird one, because it's Minako Rei. So you might be thinking, hang on a minute, we're talking about displacement, and if you're an incredibly quick reader, or if you just happen to know the new Minako's card by heart, then you'll know that she has no displacement on her card. That's true. So she has no way of moving the opposing model, but she does now have Instigate, a tome trigger on her melee, which is after resolving, you draw a card, and then the target has to take a melee action against you targeting Minako Rei. So first of all, that's incredible, because you can then defend that attack. You have your Karmic Debt trigger on a mask built in, and so if you know that you are able to defend that attack, then you can essentially force the model to attack Minako, then cheat to defend, and then you give them the Karmic Fate upgrade, and then when they die, they become a Wanyudo, and everything is groovy. But the reason she's being mentioned in this part of the video is because, in case you haven't realized it, after resolving, draw a card, then the target must take a melee action. If a model takes an action standing in Hazardous, they take the Hazardous damage. So not only do you get to smack them with Minako, you then force them to take an action, and if they are standing in a Rift marker or No Zako or a Scheme marker that's been hit with Raijin or Suzaku, then they take all of that Hazardous for the attack. Also, this is not once per turn or once per activation, so you can do it twice with Minako, so you can make them take multiple attacks targeting her, and nothing says that that attack has to miss, so you can get the Instigate trigger and also hit them, so Minako can come in, hit them for 5, force them to take an attack, and then have them take more damage from the Hazardous that they were stood in. And if they die while stood in Hazardous and you manage to get the upgrade on them, then it doesn't count as Minako having killed them, sadly. It counts as them just dying to Hazardous, but they still become a Wanyudo, and you get a slow 4 health Wanyudo for your troubles. So Minako, another way to proc the Hazardous damage. So those are the models that I would most reasonably use. I'm sure that you can find some others in 10 Thunders if you try, but those are the ones that I think are reasonable hires that you might well see and that can make really good advantage of the Hazardous. Okay. We've been using the word Hazardous, or I have, for quite a long time now. Over half an hour, good lord. And we've not even got... Christ, this is going to be a long video, I told you. So people are going to expect that. They're going to know after a while, once Asami becomes a bit more of a known entity, people are going to be very well aware that Asami wants to work with Hazardous. And therefore, you're going to see people basically building their list if I could type or spell, like this. So they're simply going to go into their crew and they're going to write incorporeal, and then they're going to build a list from there, because nobody wants to deal with that shit, and incorporeal will be an answer that some factions more than others can lean into to attempt to take the edge off what you're doing. So, for example, you might see some double Gwyn, double enslaved spirits, you might see some jackdaw, you might see some kirai, you might see some dreamer, and so on and so forth. So what do we do in that case? Does Asami2 simply not work there? Do we need to move away from Asami2 into Asami1, or what do we need to do? Well, the first thing is, and I realise we've not even looked at Asami2's card yet. We've been talking about Asami2 for 35 minutes and we've not touched her card. Don't worry about it, we'll get there. The Jorogumo is an answer to everybody's problems, which is that if they are incorporeal, then yes, that's annoying, and all of a sudden our Hazardous plan is no longer quite as murderous as it was. But being hit for 6 in the face very often offends, and having puncture available on that, along with Bloody Fate, which is an excellent trigger, and being able to prevent healing is all pretty solid. And having willpower 7, along with now movement 6, and Centuries Old, which is essentially if you hire the Jorogumo, which in Asami2 you will be doing, then it has Hard to Wound, except that it's not called Hard to Wound, so anything which would ignore Hard to Wound doesn't work. So in other words, you end up with these 3, 4, 6 massive beaters which can leap and have a threat range of about 16 inches, as I showed you at the start of the video, and you can give them focus using your totem, and all of a sudden you have puncture available as well, so you can go to double pos on damage, or single pos if you just have the ram, or just a focus, and so on and so on and so on. In other words, if you suspect, and it's generally fairly obvious from their master selection, that someone is going to be leaning into the incorporeal side of things, do you have to move away from Asami2? No. I will show you some crews at some stage in this video which don't involve relying on the Hazardous at all. So you can run anything from 1 to 3 Jorogumo, and you can run some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about. So is anti-Hazardous the end of the world? No. Let's talk about that though in a tiny bit more detail, which is to say, okay, so how do you lose? Well, people having answers to Hazardous is a big thing, because regardless of what you're doing, you will have a lot of rift markers that will benefit you more than them, and if they ignore them, that's not great. And Joros will get a lot of work done, but it's not like Joros didn't exist before, and it's not like we weren't able to ever lose a game while using Jorogumo. So, Ma2 allows the opponent's list, so long as they're in keyword, I think, to ignore Hazardous within 12 inches, and she is a size 4 model, so we can't block line of sight between her and the model that we wish to kill. 12 inches is a hell of a large area, and she is fairly sturdy herself, and she combines the other thing that Asami doesn't want to see, which is armor. So Jorogumo being min 3 make armor 2 the most horrific stat line that they really don't want to see. So yes, it's true you can hit something for 6, and even if they have armor 2, it will still go down to 4. But usually like 4 and 4 will cost you a lot of cards. You'll need to probably cheat once or twice to hit, and you'll need to cheat both times to get that severe on damage, because a moderate simply will not do. It's not good enough. So you need to get around armor, and so you can say, okay, well, what do we do about armor then? Normally what we do is we ping them to death with Hazardous. So if someone's got armor 2, not a problem, because I will hit you with one of my displacement attacks. I will deal 1, and then I'll deal 1 more from a Hazardous, I'll deal 1 more from another Hazardous, and then you'll be standing in Hazardous, so when you do anything, you're going to take 1 and 1, so you're already taking 5 damage before I've even done anything, and then if I hit you again, I can repeat that, and so on, and so on, and so on. So armor itself isn't a real problem unless it has ways to ignore Hazardous. So Ma2, that's one big way. The other one is the Metallurgist with a Soulstone Cache. I mentioned Soulstone Cache because if they don't have it, you can kill the Metallurgist relatively easily, and then the whole list starts to crumble back down to the Hazardous that we already talked about. So Hoffman with a Metallurgist in Arcanist specifically is a matchup that can have some game. Once again though, as long as you make killing that metallurgist your life's goal, and or you have good ways to move people. If they play it too defensively and you're able to sort of kidnap or displace people out of the metallurgist aura, then you can still continue with Operation Ping Them to Death. So that is so the Jorogumo are an option for doing that. In addition, we've got one more type of game plan which exists. This one is probably the most niche, I would say. It's also been not tested by me quite so much as all the other ones. It's worth mentioning that in about the last 6 weeks, I have played somewhere between 50 and 60 games of Asami. I basically lost my mind, and also I was banned from playing sports by my doctor because my ankle has an injury that's been going on for far too long, and there was an inflammation of the fluid in the joint, and so I basically was on bed rest for a month, and so in order to prevent myself going mental, I leaned into Malifaux and the big Polish team tournament and really sort of focused on that, and on learning this new keyword to a level that I was hoping no one else would be able to within the time available, and therefore having a pretty significant advantage. And it did turn out that that was the case, so at least it wasn't a wasted effort. But within those 50 to 60 games, I have only attempted this yokai strategy twice. Yokai. So they've changed quite a bit from what they were, so I'm going to talk about what they are, because what they were is irrelevant. They are now 6'5", hard to kill, so that's a pretty decent stat line, honestly. They used, I was about to say they used to be. Fuck what they used to be. They're 6'5", that is a really solid stat line, and more importantly, a lot of the stuff that people worry about in the new Asami is 5'7", so 5 defense, 7 willpower, and so they will be planning for that. So in other words, people are not going to bring as many powerful willpower attacks if they can avoid it, because they're not very effective into the Asami crew. Therefore, having a willpower of 5 is less of a downside when you're playing Asami, assuming that your opponent has some crew knowledge. And having defense 6 is something that they're not necessarily going to expect, and having hard to kill also. Twitchy is an interesting little one. A lot of people forget to use it, myself included, but it can allow you to sort of disengage for free, or just move yourself that little bit into an area where you might be scoring something that you weren't otherwise. So Twitchy, a nice little bit of kit. They've got a reasonable attack, so they can have a pos flip if you're near a rift, which you often are. On a 2-3-4, it's okay. It's stat 5, which is obviously piss, but with the potential to heal themselves and or heal Asami upon a kill. They're okay. It's a fine little attack for a 6-point model. It's okay. Where they get interesting is Wander the Earth and Dark Bargain. So Wander the Earth targets a friendly model or a model that's stunned. It drops a rift marker into base contact with this model, so it drops the rift where the yokai was when it began the teleport. Then it teleports to the target, and there is a heal and condition ending trigger there possible as well, so plenty of ways to heal yourself up. And then Dark Bargain is where the money is, so this is why I mention yokai at all, is that you've got the target suffers a damage and may take the interact, and then you've got an inbuilt mask trigger which allows you to remove a rift within one of the target, and then allows the generated interact to ignore engagement. So that can allow very obvious stuff like voting while engaged, or picking up bombs while base to base with enemy models, and so on. So Dark Bargain, when you have lists with multiple yokai and Amanjaku, you've suddenly got 3 to 4 copies of Dark Bargain on your list, some of which ignoring engagement. That can give you a different way to play Asami that the opponent may well not be expecting. And if they try too hard to counter your supposed Hazardous plan, and you turn up with a quadruple Dark Bargain heavy interact plan, then that can really swing a game in your favor. So that's the yokai. Right, it's been far too long. Let's look at Asami2 herself. Here she is. So we're now 43 minutes into the Asami2 guide, and we're looking at her card. Which will give you a bit of an indicator that Asami2 herself, the body, the card, it's not that integral to your game. And if Asami2 dies on turn 3 or 4, you will often find that that's okay. She's probably done her job by that point, and all of the things that I've talked about thus far are more important and yeah, really help. So she is a 5/7. So I've talked about this 5/7 stat line. She is one of the models that keeps it. She has something a bit like Damien and Molly, which is if this model is the crew's leader, then after an enemy model within line of sight declares an action that it's already declared, this activation, then you drop a rift marker into base contact with it. Drop's important. So if the model chooses, for example, to take a melee attack and then they take another one, and Asami2 can see them when they declare that second melee attack, then you can drop a rift into base contact with them. It's worth noting that Asami is the one dropping the rift, so you do need to be able to see where you drop that rift. You can't like drop it on the far side of them behind somewhere that you can't see. You need to be able to see where you're dropping the rift because you are the one dropping it, even though it's into base contact with the opposing model. Because they declared the action, and it's at that moment that the rift marker is dropped, then by the time that they finish that action, either by moving out of the rift or by resolving the action while standing in it, in both cases they will suffer the 1 damage from Hazardous. Because let's imagine it's a walk and they take another walk. Then on the second walk, a rift will be dropped as they declare it. They will then walk, and then they've moved through hazardous terrain. So at the end of that action, they'll take damage. And if it's a melee attack into another melee attack, then even though they didn't move, they did resolve an action while standing in hazardous. So in both cases, they will suffer hazardous damage if they repeat actions while in loss of Asami2. We'll come on to some positional stuff about this and where you might want Asami to be standing, but suffice to say that if she stood on top of a tall building and she adds the height of that building to her own height, then she can see over the majority of models and terrain, and she will be able to see a large section of the board, and it'll be difficult to hide from this. So this is one of the ways that you can generate rift markers. And we're going to talk about the other ways that you can generate rift markers once I'm done with Asami2. So we'll talk about her card, and then we'll go into all the other ways that you can generate rifts. But this is one of them. It's quite passive, so you just need Asami in a reasonable position, and then over time, people do find themselves sort of being forced to take the same action twice. They just sort of feel the need to do it, you know, whatever it might be. And so you do end up getting the occasional rifts dropping for free. A Mother's Love, this is the other part, and this is where Asami2 becomes really strong. So when another friendly Oni model within 8 inches aura of her suffers damage from an enemy action, that's a lot, but just be aware. So it's another, so not Asami2, friendly Oni, so it needs to be in keyword, 8-inch aura, so she does need line of sight, and an enemy action, so it can't be an enemy ability, it needs to be an action, it can't be hazardous damage, it needs to be an action, and it needs to be an enemy action, so you can't do it from friendly relenting attacks. It may reduce that damage by up to 2 to a minimum of 0, and if it does so, then this model suffers the damage equal to the model to the amount reduced. So in other words, let's imagine we've got Jorogumo stood next to Asami. You smack the Jorogumo and you deal 2 damage. I can say I'm going to reduce that by 2 to 0, so the Joro takes no damage, and Asami then takes 2 damage. If you did 4 damage to the Jorogumo, the maximum I could do is I could reduce the 4 down to 2, so I'd have to take 2 damage on the Jorogumo, and I could still take that other 2 onto Asami. Nothing says that that damage is irreducible, so you are then allowed to stone that damage onto Asami if you wish, so that's another way that you can really start tanking damage. However, often it's better to simply take the damage on Asami, and that's because she is pretty damn good at healing herself and also being healed. Fragment of the Gate is the last thing on the front of card, and this is simply talking about attaching that crew upgrade that we spoke about at the very start of the video. In terms of her actions, she has a willpower attack, 6 against willpower, 2, 3, 4, and then this model's choice of either stunned or injured. So very often this is just a nice willpower attack applying stunned to an important model that you want to shut down their bonus, triggers, and so on. Stunned, a very powerful status condition, so yeah, that one's a good one. What she often does is her shockwave into the beyond, 8-inch range, needs a 5 to go off, and instead of a shockwave, you in fact drop a rift marker. So it's a movement 1, a shockwave 1 with a movement 13, damage 2. Can be ignored by Oni, and the trigger, both triggers are pretty damn good. So the mask 1 is one that you're going to be fishing for quite a bit, and that is to once per turn take the action again. So essentially you're getting a free AP, right? Because you're getting one more of the exact copy of the action that you just took. and that shockwave is mainly used for, in the early turns, getting your rift markers set up further away from your models so that you're able to then start teleporting around and really being able to threaten a long distance. Additionally, it does if you drop a shockwave and you drop it underneath an enemy model, then they're now standing in Hazardous. So first of all, they don't take damage from that Hazardous being placed underneath them, but they might take damage from the shockwave itself if they fail the duel. They definitely might take damage if you get the crow trigger, and you can then place models damaged by the action anywhere within 1, so you could place them into that shockwave that you've just created. So they would take 2 damage from the shockwave, 1 from being placed into the Hazardous, plus any other Hazardous that you might have lying around. So quite a bit of damage potential there. But most importantly, it's used for Asami being able to set up your rifts in the exact places that you want them, and that might be next to your own models so that you can get some pos flips. It might be next to or underneath enemy models so that they're going to be taking some chip damage early days, or it might be putting rifts out to the sides so that your mobile pieces can then get over there and begin to score in those areas. After that, she has Oni's strength, so she can target an Oni within 1 of a rift marker, so this is another reason why you might want rifts near your stuff, and the target gains fast. You've got 2 triggers, 1 to heal either herself or the target for 2, and the other one gives focused. So very, very often Asami will be using her AP to give your most impactful models fast. She herself is not super impactful. If you've already got your rift markers where they need to be, and you don't necessarily need to emergency stun something, and you don't need to change her position because you've already got her into a good position, then most of what you're going to be doing is giving your Story of Suzaku, Amanjaku, and Jorogumo fast. And in the process, hopefully you're going to be giving them some focus, because that'll be very AP efficient, and or healing them or yourself if you are getting some damage put onto you. Then she's got Heavenly Design. This is her bonus. She can choose up to 3 rifts. Be aware that you are allowed to choose no rifts if you wish. And you can still try to flip for the triggers. You then remove the chosen markers. You heal 1 for the first rift that you remove, and then an additional 1 for the other 2 if you choose to do it. So you can heal for 2, 3, or 4, depending on how many rifts you choose to remove. Obviously, the first one is the most efficient by far, but if she's taking a bunch of damage, or if she's soaking a bunch of damage for your other Oni, you are going to be wanting to remove some extra rifts. There are lots of ways to create rifts, and so hopefully you'll have some spares lying around, and you can use those to heal Asami up. While you're doing that, you've got 2 excellent triggers. 1, Otherworldly Protection. This is essentially I've got your back, but for Oni. So choose a friendly Oni within 8 and then place the chosen model in base to base with Asami. So this is great if, for example, you've slightly overextended your No Zako, you've put her out front with her Hazardous aura up, and then suddenly she's getting beaten to death. You can bring her back and then give her fast and then heal her up, and then you can hopefully then activate her and then send her back in again the following turn and use Drink Blood to heal her back up to full and put her Hazardous aura up again, and so on and so forth. So Otherworldly Protection, quite handy to have, but not the end of the world. Reposition, very, very, very handy because of Entangled Spirits. So because you can move that 3 inches and then use the rift markers to place, this means that Asami basically gets to do leap every turn plus 3 inches movement, and then still have 3 AP ready to hand out fast, put shockwaves where you need them, or hand out stun where you need it. So Asami's main job is to be in a good position where she can provide an 8-inch aura to protect your own models, and where she can see as many of the enemy model as possible. So coming back to Vassal for a moment, I'm going to remove Asami 1 because we're not talking about her this video. That's been pretty much confirmed. A very handy place for Asami to be, for example, would be up on top of this train, because now she's height 4. So all of a sudden, let's imagine that there's a model hiding behind these barrels over here. Let's imagine it's even, an Obsidian Oni is over here. Okay. So it's over here and having a good time, except it's not within 2 inches of these barrels, so it's not within the shadow of the barrels. But normally, obviously, it's height 2, the boxes are height 2, and Asami's height 2. So if Asami's here, then the Obsidian can do whatever actions it wants, and it's not going to generate any rift markers. But if Asami is up here, then all of a sudden I can see him, and when he takes that second action again, boom, I immediately drop a rift marker under his ass. Now, I do need to be able to see the place where I put the rift marker, so again, I can't put it here. Wait, maybe I can? Yes, I can. Yes, I can, because I'm taller than him, and he doesn't have a shadow, so I actually can put it there. Bit of a weird one, but yeah, just be aware that you do need to have line of sight to wherever you want to put it. So that's worth remembering. So Asami very, very often wants to find some climbable terrain. When she's on climbable terrain, you want to make sure that you are hopefully just slightly overhanging that terrain. So if you look at this train here, I'm slightly over the edge of it here. And the reason is that that allows me to have line of sight all along this line and all along this line. Oh, I've lost my tape measure. Come on. Yeah, all along here. Normally, if I'm back here and I'm not within 1 inch of the edge, then all of a sudden anything in the shadow of this terrain I can't see. And so, for example, if I had Amanjaku over here and I had her here, then Amanjaku's in the shadow. He can't see Asami. She can't see him. And now I can't reduce damage for him. So be aware that you do want line of sight, and you need to be very conscious of shadow rules and all the line of sight rules and so on. Also, if you are on top of the train, and so you're now standing on height 2 terrain, normally you've got a shockwave of 8 inches to be able to put your rift markers, so you really can put rift markers in really useful spots out and about. However, now you need to subtract 2 inches from that range because you're trying to place the rift marker onto height 0 terrain. And so you need to sort of travel down and then across, and now your range becomes 6. So if you find yourself on, for some reason, some ridiculously tall terrain on some table and you're on height 4 terrain, just be aware that your shockwave is now only a 4-inch reach, which kind of sucks. So yeah, be careful. Standing on height 1 or height 2 terrain is pretty damn good. Standing on anything taller than that is probably actually negative for yourself. So yeah, just be careful with that. Okay, that was Asami2. And I said that after Asami2, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all the other ways that you can create rifts. How are we doing? Good Lord, this is long. I hope you like Asami. Right, so Asami2 and things which can create rifts. So we have Asami2 and her shockwave, and also Asami2 and her passive line of sight ability to drop rifts. In addition to that, we have Amanjaku, the totem. He's now a bit of a monster. He has manipulative. He is significant. He can remove a rift within 4 at the start of his activation to gain fast. His movement 6, so he's actually a fairly decent scheme runner with the combination of that abilities. He's got Arcane Reservoir, which means now it's not only Asami1 that has Arcane Reservoir, but also Asami2 because it's been moved onto the totem. And he has the same demise. I've not really talked about this demise, but this is another way in which rifts can very easily end up all over the table, is almost every Oni, with the exception of Story of Suzaku and maybe Asami herself. Yeah, and Asami herself have Demise Spiritual Tear. After this model is killed, create a destructible hazardous rift into base contact with this model. So this is create. You can't put it underneath an enemy model. You can't put it in base contact with an enemy model. So it's not going to deal damage immediately, but it does put another rift onto the table. In addition to that, Amanjaku has the power beneath. Create a destructible hazardous rift within range. So that's within 6. It's not once per activation. So Amanjaku himself can create 2 rifts per turn for you. And he has a bonus which would allow you to target one of those rifts and then move it up to 4 inches in any direction. That allows you to if we come back over to Vassal, you've got Amanjaku. In the early turns, he can create a rift within 6, and then you can push that rift up to 4. So all of a sudden, you've got a rift there, and if he creates the second rift maybe here, then you've got that perfect line for something along the lines of Amanjaku to go from here, walk here. Now I'm within 1, I can place within 6, boom, and I'm over here and I could be charging a model that's standing there. So Amanjaku really, really sets up a lot of your rift creation needs in the early turns especially, but also sometimes later on. After Amanjaku, we have Amanjaku. So Amanjaku now has Soul Collector. After an enemy model within 3 inches is killed, so again, enemy model, within 3 inches is killed, this model may create a rift marker into base contact with it. So anytime you kill anything within 3 of Ama, which will be pretty often because of her miasma, you create a rift. She also has the same demise, so if she dies, another rift. After that, we have the Obsidian Oni. So it's not a model that I love. On the surface of it, they look pretty decent, but after some pretty significant testing, I've started to stop really using them. And they can create rifts using this, rifts in reality. So this one is 8 inches, so it's a little bit further than Amanjaku, and there is a mask trigger to be able to take that again. So it's that 5 masks allowing you to create rift markers anywhere within range and then potentially take the action again. The reason that there's a few reasons why Obsidian Oni don't get a huge amount of love from me. One, their stat line. So 5552, absolutely standard. Their armor 1, not bad, but they are minions. So they're ruthless, but their damage track on both of their attacks is fairly low. So their ability to actually threaten to kill manipulative or terrifying models isn't that great, even if they do bring that ruthless tech for you. They do get to create rift markers, however, the 5 of masks required to do it twice, which is obviously where the money is exactly the same 5 of masks that Asami2 needs to do it twice. So I could imagine maybe if you really valued rifts in Asami 1, you might be looking into some Obsidian Oni, and we'll talk about that in that video. But in Asami 2 specifically, you've sort of got competition already for the low mask slot because it's also required for Amano-Zako's bonus trigger. So having another model that requires it to be efficient is really not great. In addition, their bonus action, which targets a rift and makes enemy models within 2 unable to take the interact or concentrate's largely irrelevant. People will just do something else. If you can stop people from interacting, that can be decent next to, for example, a stuff the ballots marker or an intel marker, but very often they'll be able to simply remove that rift. If it's really important for them to do so, removing a rift isn't the end of the world and people will be able to do it. Not a terrible bonus, but not amazing. The main thing that makes Obsidian Oni worth thinking about is Flames from Beyond. It's an 8-inch non-gun ranged attack, which has a positive if they're next to a rift marker, and it has blast even on a weak. So 1 blast, 3 blast, 4 blast, but most importantly, and gains stunned. So that's not all models, it's only the target gains stunned, but a defense, a 6 against defense from 8 inches away, where the target automatically becomes stunned, is a pretty decent attack. And can be very useful in certain situations where, for example, the enemy master has a low defense and is very, very averse to being stunned. But yes, we're now currently talking about how to create rifts, and the Obsidian Oni is another way. Speaking of models that I never hire, the Akaname is another possibility. So now they have a Shockwave 1, and on, again, the low mask trigger, they could, in fact, instead of dropping a Shockwave, drop a Rift. And they also now have marker removal instead of scheme dropping, so I think that's probably worse than before, but yeah, they do theoretically have a way to drop rifts, and they have a demise which allows them to either drop a rift or a sludge marker. So again, death rift stuff is one way to do it. The last way that's worth talking about is Betari. So once again, just to mention that her hunting song, which is essentially lore, but after the lore, the model drops a rift marker into base contact. Again, low masks, so you can see that low masks are really loved. If you want to... oh, I didn't see before that was enemy only. So in my head, one thing I was thinking of is you could use it to push your model away from you and then drop a rift. But I've just seen that that's enemy only, so I was trying to think of ways to make Betari more attractive, and that was one thing I came up with, but it's enemy only, so yeah. It is a way to create more rift markers on the map, though. If you do target... if you want to hit your own models, you can move Betari forwards and then hunting song your model towards her. You just can't do it away using that mask trigger. A bit of a shame, but yeah, that's another way to create rift markers. So in combination with any Oni dying, including, for example, Katashiro that might have been summoned from Minako Rei, you've then got a hell of a lot of ways to make rifts on the map, and there will be lots of them. Right. This section of the guide has been quite popular in other guide videos that I've done, so I'm going to do it for Asami as well, but I'm going to keep it a little bit more brief because I'm aware how long this video already is. So I'm not going to describe the schemes themselves. I'm going to hope that you know them by now, and if you don't, feel free to look at this section on the website and you'll be able to find out what they do and whether they're any good. So Let Them Bleed. This one is particularly good for Asami. I'm going to go through them not in the order that they are shown, but in the order of strength relative to your ability to score them with Asami2. Let Them Bleed is a very good one. The reason that it's very good is that you're going to do significant damage, but in pings of 1, so you're not necessarily going to one-shot things, you're just going to do unbelievable and frankly overwhelming damage to everything, and at a certain point, the top 2 costing models that they have alive on the table are very likely to be underneath half health. So while you might need to plan that out a little bit in terms of the maths, and maybe after you've killed their most important models and you're getting ready to kill their next most important models, you might choose to just wait one turn just to score the opening point to make sure you've got it locked in. But generally speaking, your ability to hand out that damage to their most expensive stuff will be incredibly high and not a problem. In addition to that, anything that repeats an action at any point during the game is going to have a rift dropped under its feet and therefore take a damage. So that is a really, really free, passive way to score the second point against a lot of their list. And again, your ability to hand out a Hazardous in almost anywhere. So for example, Amanjaku puts up her Hazardous aura, runs into the middle of their bubble. Anything that activates is going to take a damage. So unless they happen to have a serious amount of healing or counters to Let Them Bleed, it's going to be very, very good for Asami. Deathbeds is another one which is incredibly good for Asami because you're going to have rift markers everywhere, including all over their table half. That makes the second half really easy. You're just dropping 2 schemes anywhere near any of those 2 rifts and you're on a winner. In terms of killing a model within 2 inches of a scheme and a rift, well, killing models near rift markers is exactly what you want to be doing anyway, and it's always good to get rewarded for what you wanted to do in the first place. The only thing that's a bit tricky is dropping that scheme marker. Best way to do it is probably with one of your dark bargain models. So Amanjaku coming up and just before she kills a model, doing dark bargain on a model nearby that isn't engaged to then drop a scheme marker in range to then score the deathbeds with Ama is a good way of doing it. But you need to think about how you're going to get that scheme marker down for the kill. And you need to make sure that you've got a couple of AP left over at the end of the game or some dark bargains ready to score that last point. But the general scoring of deathbeds, very, very good. Very, very easy. In Your Face is another one that's incredibly good. You can teleport Asami to wherever she needs to be. She doesn't mind being relatively frontline within the mid-game. She doesn't want to be there immediately because she'll probably just get killed. But once the fighting has begun and once the largest threats have been removed, you just need to find any 8-point model and or just leave an 8-point model near the enemy master. And you've got a hell of a lot of displacement, so being able to kill something exactly where you want to kill it is generally pretty easy for you. In addition, Amanjaku will almost always be your scoring piece. She is a bit of a monster, very difficult to put down, has a lot of self-healing, a lot of mobility, and so with the combination of rift marker teleportation, scoring the endpoint pretty easy. So those are, I would say, the top 3. Those are the best ones. In addition, you've got Ritual. If you have a Tengu in your list, and with Asami2, I'd recommend that you do. The Tengu in the early game really just needs to stay alive, so it really doesn't mind just sitting back, popping that rift marker into the corner, and then catching up with the crew, and then being ready in the later turns to leap. With its bonus, which will allow it to leap again via the crew upgrade, and then it's still got movement 6, flight and stealth, and 2 AP left to go, so you can pretty easily go corner to corner and get ready to score your next Ritual point. So yeah, Ritual, pretty good with Tengu, pretty good in general. Amanjaku with Dark Bargain, if she's over fighting near some corners, can be involved, as can Yokai with their Dark Bargain. So Ritual, pretty good. Deliver is a question mark. I don't love the scheme in general, but your ability to have whichever model you want leap about using the crew upgrade and also have Asami2 keep it alive, probably, so it doesn't get sniped out before that first point, makes this a pretty easy 1 point. The end point, not the easiest in the world, but if you simply gain activation control by killing and then have an interact action at the end of the game, you can score that second one, so not bad. Hold up their forces. You have Amanjaku, your totem, and you have Kamaitachi in almost every list because they're ridiculously good support pieces. And Asami2 allows you to basically give all of your models effective armor too, so long as they stay near her and aren't kidnapped, and that allows you to keep these lower cost models alive. This is also a reason why you might want to reach out for that yokai list I was talking about. I'll come back to that in terms of the actual crew in a bit, but yeah, if you want some yokai or Amanjaku or Kamaitachi, then you've got those cheap pieces ready to go, and even your 8 cost models like Suzaku or Betari can probably live a fair while and stand next to a 9-point or a master. So yeah, hold up is definitely scoreable. Espionage, relatively scoreable by a lot of crews. You do need quite a lot of scheme markers, which she doesn't love. There's a bit of dark bargain going on. Again, yokai might help, No Zako certainly helps, but generally speaking, so long as you just murder them, then it's not the end of the world to be able to drop a few schemes while you're doing it, and having the mobility of the entangled spirits to be able to teleport both forwards to be able to get the ones in the enemy scheme deployment zone, but also backwards to protect your own deployment if the enemy's trying to deny you, is quite handy. Sweating bullets is largely about murder and having a model survive to engage the enemy master or henchman in the early game near the middle. So we would love to meet the enemy near the middle, and then we would love to kill all their masters and henchmen during the game. So again, being rewarded for something you want to do anyway is excellent. Sweating bullets, a very good choice. Protected territory, probably the easiest scheme in the entire GG for almost any crew to score. You simply kill them, and then once they're dead, drop a scheme marker and you're good to go. And then at the end of the game, make sure they're dead, and then drop a couple of schemes. Job's done. So, protected territory, really good, really easy. The bad ones, if we're looking for bad ones, are outflank. Asami wants to bubble up, relatively speaking, within her 8, and so then spending a reasonable amount of time going out to the corners or edges and then dropping schemes, which you probably have to spend AP on unless you're running yokai specific stuff. Not great. Outflank in general is pretty weak scheme in my opinion, and especially so in Asami2. Ensnare, you don't have any particular tech pieces that allow you to drop scheme markers outside of a regular interact. That makes the positioning tricky, that makes being engaged tricky. If you hire a model like a huckster that's really good at scoring Ensnare out of keyword, then it's going to be very, very obvious what you're trying to do, and that model's likely to get targeted down. So Ensnare, not great. Info overload, also pretty bad, because unless you're running that double, triple yokai kind of list and you go in dark bargain for days, then you simply don't have a lot of free scheme generation. You don't have a great deal of scheme denial either, in case the opponent is running the kind of list that would be able to contest. So info overload, not the best. The worst by far is Take Prisoner. Take Prisoner is generally a pretty bad scheme, but it is even worse here because you are going to be covering the map with your own hazardous terrain, and so the enemy model which has been taken prisoner can simply kill itself on your hazardous, and it will not count as being killed by them, and therefore they get to just deny you that point for free. Not good. Also just generally a pretty terrible scheme. So those are the schemes. In terms of strategies, I've talked about it before, but I'll repeat my thoughts, which is that generally speaking, GG4 allows you in almost every strategy to simply kill them and then score over their dead body. So Raid the Vaults in particular, Plant Explosives definitely, Cloak and Dagger to some extent. Stuff the Ballots is the one that I would say is maybe the most interacty, and it's the one where you're more likely to run into really skewed bullshit stuff like Rasputina being able to channel votes through ice pillars. Obviously it's pretty nonsense, but it's allowed, and so, well, it's allowed currently, and so you don't want to be taking a ton of interacts with Asami. Again, you might be thinking about the yokai for the dark bargain stuff, but generally Stuff the Ballot's probably the weaker one for Asami, but it's still generally very, very possible to simply murder them and then have a Tengu leap up behind and vote as you wish, and you simply sort of clear one ballot, vote all over it, and then move to the next one, rinse, repeat, and as long as you can do that 4 times, you can score all 4 strat. So strategies definitely all possible. Right, let's talk about models then. So we have Asami2 and we have Amanjaku. Those are pretty much always there in an Asami2 list. I say almost, they are always there, so we don't really need to discuss them. I've already covered them a little bit. No Zako. She is an auto-include in the vast majority of cases because her 3-inch Hazardous aura is absolutely nuts, and it's what you want to be doing most of the time. In addition, she's got a 3-4-5. She has the Soul Collector for extra rifts. She has Terrifying 12 now, and she has Dark Bargain, and that Dark Bargain can also be used with a mask trigger to take any action instead of just an interact. So in other words, she can have 3 AP, 2 regular, and 1 from her bonus mask trigger, and then you can give her fast with Asami2, and suddenly she's a 4 AP 10 stone henchman. That is pretty brutal and needs a really, really good reason not to take her. The only times you probably wouldn't take her then are when you expect full incorporeal enemy crews, or Ma2, where you know that you're going to be meeting armor, so Min 3 not so good, and where you're going to be meeting anti-hazardous, where her hazardous shtick all kind of falls off. So Ama almost certainly in every list, except in the cases where you know that they're going to be really shutting down your hazardous. The same is basically true for Suzaku. So Suzaku is MVP in a great number of games. She deals the most damage by far of any of your models as a result of all the hazardous stuff that you can do. She has the best output for it. I'll bring the model up. So here we go. We have Up We Go, which is 2, 3, 4 plus the hazardous stuff. And also provides burning for itself. Using that burning can reduce damage, and then you can combine the reduction of damage from burning with the reduction of damage from Asami. And so Story of Suzaku can effectively be armor 4, which reduces down to 0, so long as you have enough burning, and if you're near Asami 2, you are pretty much indestructible. So that's really good to know. In addition, does have a gun, the Conflagration 235 plus burning. It is a pistol, it is only 8 inches, but it's 6 against defense, and if you've got some focus, there are times when you will want to use that. The 2 bonus actions are really, really good. So first of all, we've got Wind Up Bird. They never rewrote this, so discarding Flicker from the target, you can basically ignore that. It'll never happen. So now it basically says the following. Remove a condition on the target, friendly only. This model gains burning 2. So it gives you condition removal, and that condition removal allows you to gain more burning on yourself. So in an early turn, if you know you're not going to get into a fight, you might actually want to take something like focused on a Tengu, they don't really need it, and then remove it with Suzaku to get that early burning going so that she can survive later. Or you can play Minako Rei, summon a Katashiro, that Katashiro comes in with slow, and then you remove the slow with Suzaku and get an extra AP effectively, while also gaining that burning. So Suzaku, an absolute monster, and a pretty much mainstay in the majority of Asami2 lists. Same caveat as No Zako, which is where if the entire opposing list is likely to have flight, so Nephilim, or if they are immune to hazardous in any other way, then it becomes a bit weaker. Honestly, the bird's so good that you might even still go for it. One last thing I forgot to mention is Wind's Wrath, and this is important. Move this model and other models in range up to 1. So first of all, it's unresisted. There's no flip, it just happens. That means that she can take fast, for example, charge in, teleporting during the charge, smack them, 2, 3, 4, plus hazardous, smack them again, 2, 3, 4, plus hazardous, smack them again because you're fast, 2, 3, 4, plus hazardous, and then you can do an unresisted bonus which pushes them again, so then they take plus hazardous. So the damage that you do will very often murder a master within this first turn. Suzaku is an absolute monster, I cannot stress that enough. Jorogumo. Jorogumo we've already talked about, but to quickly recap, they are your non-hazardous reliant damage sources, and they have the anti-heal. So anti-heal, very, very important against a lot of crews, and their ability to be a 50 mil, which means they take the most advantage possible from the rift teleports, plus they have extended reach, plus when you hire them, they're hard to wound, plus when they're near Asami 2, they're effectively armor 2. It makes them these monstrous, tanky, high damage dealing, good output models for you to sink your cards and resources into. Tengu, I find I'm hiring one of those almost every time now because you can keep it alive near Asami 2, and then whenever you want to, it can leap again with the crew upgrade, and then still have movement 6, flight, and 2 AP, which results in VP, almost always. So I think a Tengu for 5 is a bargain in Asami 2, and you should probably be taking one. They do also have a stun on their melee, which is a willpower stat 5. Not great, but occasionally if you want to stun something, can be handy. Right, then we move into the ones that I've already mentioned are maybe not so great. So Akaname, I would not be hiring those pretty much ever, and they can go away. Obsidian Oni are very niche, so when there's something that really needs to be stunned, or if you really, really feel like you need more rift markers, and I still don't recommend it, then you could take an Obsidian Oni, but generally speaking, I don't hire them, and away we go. Betari, I do actually hire Betari. Sometimes when you really need to kidnap something, or when resistance triggers need to go away, she turns up and does some work for you. So I'm keeping her on the screen. Yokai, I've mentioned them. They're not an auto hire, but when you want to pivot away from what people expect and you want to go with something a bit different, hold up their forces or stuff the ballots, or just generally leaning away from willpower 7 and into defense 6 hard to kill, I honestly think they might be decent. Lady Yume, I, as I said, have played 50 plus games of Asami, and I've never once felt the need to hire her. I do not think she's good enough anymore. Her card draw and her card fixing was her main thing, and they've both been made significantly weaker. I don't think her damage and offensive output is worthwhile, and so she's gone. So that is the keyword, and we're left with, as you can see, quite a small selection of models that we pretty much always run. Then we have the out of keyword stuff and the versatile stuff. So first of all, the Minako Rei package. So that's Minako, Katashiro, and Wanyudos. Minako, I honestly do think is pretty decent. The thing is that she doesn't benefit from the ability to soak damage. She doesn't benefit from the crew upgrade because she's not an Oni. She does benefit from rift markers because she's able to turn them into Katashiro. And those Katashiro, even though they are summoned, the crew upgrade is on the player, not on the model, and therefore summoned Katashiro do benefit from it. And so your Katashiro suddenly will have the Entangled Spirit's ability to leap around via rifts. And so you're creating some pretty solid schemas for stuff like ritual and or protected territory and or whatever you want. I think they are solid. In addition, they've now got a different demise, so they're no longer on 5 health. It's still incorrect on Vassal. They're on 3 health now, but their demise says that they drop a rift, create a rift marker like most of the Oni, but also that they now remove a pass token from the enemy if they have one, so long as the Katashiro wasn't activated. So they're less of a risk of just being like giving activation order away now, so I do think that they're really handy to have, and they've now got paper cuts as a melee attack, so they can actually remove scheme markers via attacking enemy models, and as long as they hit, they'll remove a scheme marker within 1. That's really, really cool. And I think that Katashiro now certainly have a place when summoned by Minako. I don't think you ever hire them, not really. Maybe you try it out, but probably not. But Minako certainly has a place. And then, as I mentioned, she does have that way to force people to attack, and that can be another way of triggering Hazardous, which is very handy. And if she succeeds with her instigate nonsense, then you can end up with a Wanyudo, and that can be a cool piece as well. So that Minako package, I certainly think, has its place. I think it has more of a place in Asami 1, and I'll cover it more there, but I think it's certainly worth keeping in mind. The 3 out of keyword picks that I think are the most impactful in Asami 2 are Maddox, Kenshiro, and Raijin. So Kenshiro and Raijin both fulfill the same slot, essentially. They are there to provide displacement in different ways, and in the case of Raijin, an additional form of Hazardous, but Kenshiro then brings a little bit of card fixing with him, and he brings some armor piercing, and some people do like to bring, as I mentioned, armor into the Asami list, so having that armor piercing there ready and waiting for them can be a really cool thing. But Asami 2's card fixing is... Oh, God, Jesus, I forgot the Kamaitachi. Hold the phone, everybody. Wait. There he is. I'll come right back to you, Kenshiro. You hold your fucking phone. Right. Kamaitachi. Also basically an auto-include. Let's bring up the card. It's good enough to warrant its own little section. Here is the Wonder Weasel. So now it is significant. So that was a big thing that it didn't have before. Now it also has Eye of the Hurricane, allowing you to ignore aura effects of enemy models. So for example, your opponent turns up with their Hazardous aura on one of their models, the Ice Golem in Raspi 2 for example, and you simply put the Kamaitachi nearby and ignore the hell out of it. You can also ignore things like Extended Reach, McCabe's upgrade -1 Cursed Objects aura, and all the other things you can think of. It is loyal, so it can only be used in the Oni keyword, but it is ridiculously good because it has a 2/3/3 melee attack ignoring hard to kill that's completely irrelevant really. You don't use it And where the money is Wonder Weasel, which is the bonus at the bottom here. Discard 2 cards, draw an equal number of cards. So as a bonus, with no flip, no TN, nothing, you simply cycle 2 every turn with the Wonder Weasel. It's perfect. If you don't need to do that for any reason, you can instead push a Rift around and maybe get that 1 unresisted damage you need to finish off a model. But additionally, it has the heal. This is an Oni only heal, but it's a 1/2/3 heal which receives a positive if the model is within 1 inch of a friendly rift, which they nearly always are. So you're looking at a sort of 2/3 heal twice from the Kamaitachi, and you can use the Entangled Spirits teleportation to get to where you need to be to land that heal. So that's great. In addition, he has the Dust Devil, so this is a towards or away shockwave that pushes models, and that means that this model not only brings healing, not only brings card cycle, not only brings Eye of the Hurricane, but also brings unpack, because on turn 1 you do Dust Devil twice, you put that shockwave in the middle of your models or just behind your models and push them all 2 inches forwards and then 2 inches more, so you get 4 inches movement on multiple models, turn 1 and perhaps 2 from the Kamaitachi. Additionally, this is another way to theoretically displace enemy models, so if you put that shockwave around and pull them into a bunch of Hazardous if they fail the TNs. I don't use it for that very much, I'd rather just be using the heals and the card cycle and so on, but yeah, Kamaitachi, absolute beaut. Right, sorry, coming back to the out of keyword stuff. So Raijin and Kenshiro, they're your displacement tools with their various bits. Maddox is your card fixing extraordinaire within 10 Thunders. So her ability to punch your own models twice, declaring deja vu, and use jackpot in combination with Rig the Deck 3 means that you get rid of an unbelievable number of weeks from your list, from your deck, and you draw a ridiculous number of cards, meaning that you've generally got incredibly high card quality and can guarantee a great deal of what you then want to do in the turn, whatever that may be. So Maddox, even if you want Joros and you just want them to hit really hard, fantastic, or you want to be able to defend and make sure that you you don't get hit by those really important things, or you want to make sure that Suzaku definitely gets the hits off for Up We Go, or you want to get your summoned Katashiro off with Minako Rei, or whatever it may be, Maddox is there for you. So Maddox, always a good choice out of keyword. Thangyong, right on the other side of things, is your defensive pick. So if you are really worried about, for example, Asami being kidnapped, and therefore her sort of 8-inch aura of protection being removed from all of your other models, you can have Thangyong there as the sort of anti-kidnap piece. So one of the ways to get around Asami's defensive tech is to kidnap either her or displace her, so push her away, move her out, or kidnap her into your own crew, or it's to kidnap or displace the model that you're trying to kill. So either one, move them outside of the 8-inch aura of Asami, and then suddenly they're much more unprotected and you can murder them. Thangyong is there to be designed to basically survive that, and also to take the hit for whichever model would have been moved and just prevent those displacement effects. Also, he has a ping heal, which is nice, plus ping damage, which is nice, and Righteous Protector, while moving your own models around, can actually force a movement duel, willpower, on opposing models, and that can also have a push, so then, if there's some Hazardous around, that can be a nice little bit of extra damage as well. But generally speaking, Than is there if you suspect people are going to be using displacement or kidnap on you. Charm Warders, always a tech piece that's available for you in Thunders, and very much so also in Asami2. Mainly this is if you expect people to be leaning very heavily into Incorporeal. So they ignore Incorp on their melee, and their damage done from their tactical. Their Chaos Theory is from a tactical action, and therefore also ignores Incorporeal, so they can do serious anti-Incorp work. They can also deal with summons, they can also deal with demise, and they can also injure things, which makes it easier to hit with everything else, and also they can drain the opponent's hand, which has effectively the same impact. So Charm Ward is always an option, depending on the matchup. Low River Monk is a weird one, but if you're running a bunch of out-of-keyword stuff, so if you are sort of pushed away from your in-keyword Hazardous plan for whatever reason, or you just want to have even more healing, so if you want to, if you think that someone's just going to try and put so much damage into your crew generally with blasts and AoE and just serious output that you don't think you're going to be able to keep Asami alive, then just having a Low River Monk behind her, just constantly feeding her health, and it can sit way back, and doesn't cost too much, and can also heal your out of keyword stuff. So Kamaitachi is keyword locked into what most of the stuff that it does. So you do want low River Monk. For example, if you've got Thangyong, you really do benefit from having the ability to heal him up. So if you're playing really defensive, you can consider a low River Monk. I don't consider it one of the best choices, but I did try it more than once. More than once it did perform. So I'm going to leave it there. It's an option. Terracotta Warriors, similar sort of thing to Thangyong really. You can have one just if you think that there's like one displacement effect that you really want to avoid. You can have your Terracotta Warrior, just sit there, draw you some cards, and also threaten to become the bird again or become a Jorogumo again with a high mask at some point during the game. So Terracotta Warriors, I think more of a thing in Asami 1, but definitely an option in Asami 2. Worth mentioning, by the way, that if you do bring a Jorogumo back, as in your Terracotta Warrior uses Mold of the Other, well, the Terracotta Warrior was hired, and therefore when it replaces with a Jorogumo, it's still a hired Jorogumo, and therefore it benefits from that centuries old, like, hard to wound tech. So yeah, that's worth mentioning. Right, we're already so far over the hour that I'm honestly just going to keep going, and if you wish to continue learning about Asami, then stay with me, and if you are long done with this shit and you want to hear no more, then I wish you the very best. Okay. Whew. Asami 2 and unpacking. Let's take my standard Asami 2 list. That looks like this. So that is Asami 2 with Totem, Kamaitachi, and Tengu. Then Amanjaku, Story of Suzaku, Jorogumo, and Raijin. This will be my usual list, and it's going to look something like this. So in terms of unpack, you are going to want Amanjaku and Story of Suzaku somewhere relatively close to each other. Doesn't massively matter where they are, they're both flying models and you can teleport with everything anyway. You're going to want Asami somewhere vaguely central where she can see as much of the board as possible. So for example, right now she can see everything through here, she can see everything through here, and obviously she can see everything in this area and this area, so this is not bad. Also, I know that I would like to put her up on top of this climbable terrain, so I'm going to put her somewhere near it so that I can start to move towards it. So Asami somewhere in the mix. Jorogumo is not necessarily always your turn one focus, so you don't need to have it in a very specific place, but in turn 2 you're going to want to sort of have it moved pretty soon. Because it'll become very dangerous later on, but you've only got so many places that you can put your resources. So Raijin is a model that you can't necessarily like teleport using the rift teleports with, so you're going to want Raijin to be part of the little bubble of models that we're going to push forward with Kamaitachi. Tengu is very often just wanting to stay back and stay safe in the early game. The only thing the Tengu wants to do on turn 1 is not die, and then on turn 2 it can do leap and then teleport with rifts and then move to wherever it wants to be and start scoring safely, because in the end turns it wants to go leap, teleport with rifts, and then start scoring unsafely, sort of on its own to the edges. But in the early game, just keep it safe. Maybe it's going to be back here getting ready to score power ritual, and then it's going to go leap and then move to, you know, near Asami, but in the back. Like, your Tengu's job is stay safe. So I've removed a lot of the terrain from this map so that there's nothing here that looks that blocks line of sight much, but very often, like, if you can put it in some, like, behind a building or in some concealing terrain or whatever, just have it near Asami relatively and out of danger. Amanjaku needs a couple of things. So he needs line of sight to the area around Amanjaku and Suzaku, and he wants to be somewhere near the front so that he can chuck one of his rifts forwards. We'll come on to the why in a minute. Okay, so we have a hand of 7 cards. That's a reasonably decent indication of a hand. So a couple of important things here that are worth mentioning is that we have the card that we would need if we wanted to do Asami 2's like I've got your back trigger on her bonus. We also have the very, very important 5 masks. This is useful for Asami 2 repeating her shockwave or using reposition on her bonus, or having Amanjaku take a different action other than interact with the Dark Bargain. So So 5 masks, really, really good to see. And then we are not at all bothered about having 2 really shitty cards, because the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to activate Kamaitachi. So Kamaitachi is, generally speaking, going to be the one that goes first. First thing he's going to do is Wonder Weasel. So he's going to discard those 2 shit cards, get them out of our life, and then bring in Good Lord. So yeah, Kamaitachi already showing up for work. Then he's going to do that shockwave that we talked about, and he's going to say away. It's going to go off because we need a 5. So we're going to take that shockwave. Here we go. Bop. And we're going to put that shockwave touching Amanjaku and basically touching all of these models. So then we can move up 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, because if it's touching, you can choose any point on the shockwave, any point on the model, and go away from there. So that's that. And then we can basically just repeat that action. It sadly goes off very, very well. We bring that shockwave up to somewhere like here, and now Asami's up here, Raijin's up here, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do this very, very roughly, but you can see that we've already gained 4 inches on 4 models, so we've just got 16 inches of movement and 2 card cycles from the Kamaitachi, and he's done. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to activate Amanjaku. So Amanjaku often usually goes later in the turn, but on the first turn he can go early because his manipulative is less important and because we need the rifts. So he's going to create a rift. He needs a 6 for that. He doesn't get it. We're going to have to cheat it because these rifts are pretty damned important. We're going to want 1 rift that is within 1 of Suzaku and Amanjaku, and then we're going to want to create another rift, and that's going to fail. We can't really afford to cheat these sorts of cards for that. So we don't have a rift that we want or need to push further forwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some focus on somebody, and the Jorogumo is the one that benefits most from focus. So we'll use Amanjaku's second bonus to give focus. We need a 5, and it's well worth a shitty 5 for a focus on a Joro, because that can very often be a dead enemy model. Amanjaku is done. After that, we can start pretty much going with our more key pieces. So assuming that we are in the right positions for it, what we want to do is go here with Asami2. So the first thing Asami2 is going to do is she's going to give fast to Amanjaku and Suzaku. So Amanjaku, no, we're going to need that to go off. If we had Kenshiro in the list, we'd probably use a tactics token for that, but we don't. So we're going to actually have to spend an 11 and fast for Ama, and then we're going to have to go fast for Suzaku. Please give me a 6. God damn it. Depending on how well we think we can kill here, we might in fact cheat that, but I think it's way too much. We just accept Suzaku didn't get the fast. Sad times. So that's 2 AP. Then we're going to create a rift marker. We almost got it with the trigger, but now we cheat this one for the double rift. So first rift within 8, so we can put that rift further forwards. Generally speaking, you want to put your rifts somewhere where they're going to be a bit irritating for the opposing models that are going to want to come through, right? So wherever those choke points are, you're going to want rifts there. It's where your models are likely to want to get to anyway, and it's going to give them things that they have to deal with. And then the second one, since we had the trigger, we can do it again. It fails, and we're just having some pretty shitty luck with our low TNs. This is where things can go a bit wrong with Asami. That's definitely not worth any high cards. If we'd got it, we would have put it up here, and that would have allowed us to be in position later to teleport Asami up to this train, but we're going to have to just wait for that. So that was that. And then we can do my bonus action. We target no rifts because we don't need to heal. We don't want to remove anything. We're just checking for the triggers. We waste a severe, unfortunately, and we didn't get either reposition or I've got your back. If we'd got the I got your back, which is the crow trigger, we could have brought the Joro up, for example, and had it in position to then be able to charge here, be within 1 of a rift, place here within 1 of a rift, and attack something here. So you can already see that the Joro is now able to charge from there to there with very little effort, but we didn't get any of that, so Asami is simply done. Sad times. In the early turns, then, we know that we didn't get the rift network up that we would need for the Joro to be really useful, and we didn't get the trigger to pull the Joro up to Asami. So we can probably just go with that Joro. We can use the trigger for, the bonus for Frightening Reminder. So we can move up. We want to be basically touching Asami, but giving her the ability to like have space to move. We want to touch her because we want to be have control over the away portion of this. So we do Frightening Reminder. it goes off, we waste another severe, but it can go 4 inches away. Because we're touching, we can go in this direction, and now Asami could be here. I'm not suggesting that this is your opening and every time unpack, it's just one particular option. It really depends. If your opponent is being really defensive and holding back and you want to put pressure on, you can push Asami forwards. If not, then of course Asami can stay back here and that would be absolutely fine. You could put your Joro here and you could push Raijin up a little bit so that he's in a position to threaten some shockwaves or some maddening drums or whatever, or you simply don't do any, you don't do frightening reminder with the Jorogumo. It's totally fine, you don't have to. Then you take a focus so that we got this double focused murdery Jorogumo ready to go for next turn. In a perfect world you'd have him here so that you can then sort of get towards a rift marker which will maybe be put up here next turn, and then boom, charge and get in there and really hurt things. So your Jorogumo is very often just sort of getting ready for next turn, taking another focus and being done. Your Tengu, as mentioned, can take a focus for Suzaku to eat and just generally wants to probably end up doing something like drop a scheme marker, leap, yeah, sure, and just be somewhere in range, preferably out of blast, you know, all the usual core concepts of the game arrive, and be done. The reason that we're just getting these activations out of the way is because the ones that matter are these two. So Raijin can sometimes try to maddening drum something in to this rift marker, dealing 2 damage for the marker removal, 1 for the hazardous. That's a nice option. Or he can just basically get roughly up into the area where the following turn he can walk, charge, or preferably charge and double attack into the enemy. So Raijin wants to be, you know, up somewhere. This is a bit too much ahead of the crew, but generally speaking, you get the idea. Raijin wants to be ready to the following turn get in there. So he might end up somewhere like, I don't know, here with a bit of concealment and then be ready to attack something near this rift and then plop it from there into the rift. Something like that. It really depends on what your opponent's doing, but generally prepare Raijin to be able to get aggressive the following turn, or use maddening drums for kidnaps onto your frontal rift markers. You might have more than one if you haven't failed a bunch of TNs early on. Then you've got the money shot, so that is Ama and Suzaku. So usually speaking, you're going to have Ama go, she's going to go up to there, which will allow her to place to there. Then she can put up her hazardous aura, so that's 1 movement, 1 AP for the hazardous aura, and then a charge. So you'll charge something, whatever it is. You know, let's imagine there's a model here, we charge it, we smack it, fantastic, we hit it, we probably do 3 damage, they reduce a little bit, blah, 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 we do some damage. Fine, that's good enough. Then we got the bird. So the bird can then would normally have fast, in this case doesn't, but we'll have, let's imagine we have fast. So we can do a couple of things. One is we can take that focus from the Tengu and simply move up, take focus and be done and be ready for next turn. You know, if we weren't able to get really aggressive, we can just set up. But if we were ready, and if they did come too far forwards, or if we were able to get a kidnap with Raijin, or if we were able to set up a target and get the hazardous aura with No Zako, then suddenly we're ready to go walk, charge. Because we're here, we can place anywhere within 1 of the rift markers, so we can be here. Now we can hit anything within 2, so this model that was here we can hit. We spend well versed and we have a look at the card. We say that's a pretty fucking perfect card, wonderful. 16 against your size, we definitely hit you. So this model, which we're going to pretend is a Wanyudo, enemy Wanyudo was here, okay, he's already taken maybe 1 damage from Amanjaku. Cool, we've now hit him. He can be placed within 3. He gets placed here. He's going to take 1 damage from Ama's hazardous, he's going to take 1 damage from the rift marker. He's then going to take usually a week of 2, so he's now taken 4 damage, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I can use my bonus with Suzaku, unresisted, nothing he can do about it, to push the Wanyudo 1 inch, boom, he takes 2 more damage, 1 from the rift, 1 from Amanjaku, and he's dead. In addition, that would allow me to move Amanjaku a little bit, and also, that model would have died within 3 inches of Amanjaku, so I would get to drop another rift marker from it because of Soul Collector. Suzaku's bonus doesn't just push enemy models, it also pushes himself, and if or herself, and if she hadn't already used the rift marker to teleport, if I didn't need it, then that would then allow me to teleport using that, because my bonus pushes me 1, I'm therefore eligible to teleport anywhere within 6 that's within 1 of a rift. So having run forward and killed a model, I could then teleport back out to safety and be right next to Asami and right next to a rift marker, and generally in a very good spot. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a very rough idea. I realize I wasn't showing any enemy models and I was rushing through that very quickly, but that is approximately how you might begin to open with a regular Asami2 list. if I haven't mentioned anything about the Asami crew at this point, I think it probably isn't important enough to worry about. So this is going to be the end of my Asami2 guide. I hope that it is helpful for you guys, and I look forward to hearing your comments and thoughts, as always, over on YouTube. I do intend to do another guide at some point in the coming days on Asami1, so this will be my sort of baseline Asami guide, since I've covered the majority of the models and what they do, and I will do another one which sort of focuses on Asami1's side of things, but it will hopefully be a much shorter video because it will draw on a lot of what we've already covered here. So if you're more interested in Asami1, don't fear, that video will be coming as soon as I've got my voice back from recording this one. I hope you're all well, have a great day, and I'll see you for the next one. Take care.